Today on The State of Us, can you have freedom at work? What's the difference between positive liberty and negative liberty? Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today, of course, by your friendly redneck liberal, the Mr. Lance Jackson. And we've got an interesting topic today. It's from an article in the Wall Street Journal called The Real Meaning of Freedom at Work. And the subtext here is that the rise of remote work during the pandemic is just one part of a generational shift that is redefining how and why we do our jobs. But before we dive headfirst into this, Lance, what's our word of the day?
We get to be loquacious today. And this is a topic that I think we can be very loquacious. And I'm interested in being loquacious today. And Justin will have to work very hard to be more loquacious than me. Loquacious is L-O-Q-U-A-C-I-O-U-S, 3 syllables. Using it as an adjective, it means very talkative or fond of talking.
I wrote it down before you had mentioned, and I almost had it right, but I used a C instead of a QU.
Well, I'm liking those QU words because, we had qualm, loquacious, so
the QUs.
I'm into the QU words.
Interesting English phenomenon, right? Why the heck do we have a letter that always has to be followed by another letter? Very strange. Why not just have one letter?
The rules of English, which we think is so simple to speak, is really one of the toughest languages to learn because we have so many rules compared to other languages.
For some of our wiser listeners, I'm sure it would be easy to recall that more than a decade ago, psychologists were basically documenting a generational shift in the centrality of all of our lives. And that was this idea, right, that millennials were more interested in jobs that provided leisure time and vacation access than Gen Xers and baby boomers. And it's something that Lance and I have even talked about over the course of the years.
My daughters have talked about that since they've been in college.
And they're both millennials, right?
And they're both millennials, and they want a job where they're not so worried about how much money they're making, but how much freedom do they have to do other things outside of work, which is basically, right, what we're talking about.
Right, exactly. Millennials have ultimately been less concerned about net worth, and they're more concerned about this idea of net freedom. And what do we mean by net freedom? Well, summarily, net freedom simply is the cumulative combined effect of negative liberty, which is freedom from obstacles and interference by others, and positive liberty, which is the freedom to control your own destiny and shape your own life. These terms were defined by Isaiah Berlin in a 1958 lecture. And basically the concept here, right, is this notion that, for example, the idea of working part of the time from home, is that negative liberty or positive liberty? Well, it's a form of negative liberty, right? Because it really doesn't change the bottom line of what you have to do. It just is merely giving you more flexibility in how or when you get it done. Where, for example, positive liberty is the freedom to control your own destiny and shape your own life. Examples of that would be like, you get to choose the team of people that you're going to work with at work. You set the agenda of tasks that you're going to take on at work. And, obviously you're choosing the job or jobs that you're doing. So it's a fine line, but the reason that we're bringing that up is it's an important distinction to understanding as we talk through the rise of remote work, is just one part of this generational shift that's redefining how, and the big part, why we do our jobs, right? So today, Lance, we want to look at a little bit of this idea of being paid for your time versus being paid for your work. The concerns about that sounds great for some jobs, but there's other jobs where you just got to be there, right, for a certain period of time. I mean, that's the nature of the job. Because we hear a lot about, right, it's a very trendy thing right now to talk about the, well, you need to do things that free you from time constraints, where you can do things on your own agenda. Well, there's certain types of jobs where that's just, at least right now, that's not an option, right? And that's everything from people who are working manual labor type jobs in some cases, particularly those working in manufacturing, right? Or factory style settings, but also even in certain professional careers, like a lot of people in healthcare, right? I mean, if there's an emergency, somebody's got to be available. It can't just be, well, I didn't feel like coming in today, so the ER is closed,
Right. There are people that have to, man the emergency room.
Yep. And teachers are another good example of your kind of white collar style jobs, right? That still require a physical presence at a given time. Just if for nothing else, the sake of sanity of you can't just have students show up at any time and the teachers show up whenever they want. And I mean, that would not be terribly conducive to being very efficient in how we educate people. The article explains, Lance, that to free people from these constraints, we need better boundaries. Kind of interesting here. There's evidence that working from home has been more stressful for segmenters who prefer to separate the different spheres of their life than for the integrators who are happy to blur the lines. Good segmentation policies allow people to commit to predictable time off that shields them from work intrusions into their lives. So I thought this was interesting, right? Because we always think about, well, working from home, that's got to be better, right? Well, people like the flexibility, but they're actually working more when they work from home.
Yeah, that's something we found out during the pandemic, right? There were reports and after report that said, people didn't have to travel. They didn't have to, they could wear comfortable clothes. They could set up where they wanted to in their home. They actually ended up working more hours at home than they did when they were going to the office. And they also had so many meetings to attend to, and that's another piece here of how much time are you spending in meetings when you could also have time to be productive and work. And again, not to be loquacious, but I really wish there was a different term, because here in this case, negative liberty is actually a positive thing. And so, don't think because you heard the word negative before liberty that it's bad freedoms. Okay. There actually is something to freeing yourselves from obstacles and interference in the workplace, where that is conducive to feeling better about yourself and your workplace. I'm done because I didn't want to be loquacious. So you can take it back there.
Well, and that's one of the things that was learned from the pandemic is not just people are working more, but also that on remote teams, it's not the frequency of the interaction that fuels productivity and creativity. It's the intensity of interaction. So one of the adjustments that has to be made when you're doing remote work is, well, we're going to come together for, this hybrid work, right? So you're going to do all this stuff, go do your tasks at home. And then once a week, we're going to come into the office. We're going to do our meetings and talk. Well, do we need one meeting a week? Do we need 3 meetings a week? Do we need one a month? How many do we need? Well, part of what the article is revealing is that it's actually better to condense those meetings than it is to spread them out and create more of them, because people will do 2 things that are really important, right? One is they're far more likely to be engaged when they show up because they know that they only get so many of these opportunities. And the second thing that does, right, is it also means they prioritize and think about, is what I'm going to say really necessary? In other words, am I just making conversation here, kind of throwing stuff out and I don't really know where it's going? Or, hey, I only get one of these times a month. It's going to be another 4 weeks before I see these people. I got to get an answer to X, so I'm going to make sure that I get an answer to this thing, which, I mean, we've probably all been in meetings where, it drones on and on. It's like, why are we here and what is happening? And nobody knows. And this is a great way to combat that anyway, but it's particularly important with remote work because part of what managers are facing, right, is this whole thing of, well, people want this flexibility. We give them this flexibility, but then if creativity dies, that's no good. So then we try to solve it by adding all these meetings, and that's not doing any good because people aren't engaging.
Exactly. Well, I found this interesting. Another effective strategy they said was by blocking out the morning and letting people work in the morning, and then they would come together for their meetings after lunch. And in the afternoon, it said that these meetings were more productive because people were less likely to multitask, they think, because they had been able to make progress on their own task. I find that interesting because when I was working, I hated afternoon meetings because I'm a morning person. But it makes sense. It's like, okay, we're going to tell you I wonder if it would work if they flipped it and said, okay, we're going to have meetings in the morning and then you can have your own time in the afternoon. Now, the drawback I see is I'm also had that happen at school. We had morning meetings and then had kids. I was exhausted because it took all my energy in the meeting and then it was hard to work. So I don't know how that plays out, but the study, they said that if they freed people up in the mornings and they got to work on their own things, they found that the afternoon meetings were more productive than the morning meetings because people were less likely to multitask because they were thinking about all the things they needed to get done. Some of the things we found out from the pandemic can now be applied, as you pointed out, to certain businesses post-pandemic or as we start to go back into the workplace.
We talked a little bit about what the pandemic has taught us about the workplace and how this whole idea of you deciding, right, you being the worker, you having more freedom at work. The pandemic's opened kind of this box. We've seen people, they're thinking about this, right? They're interested in it. But we know that millennials have been interested in it in a while, and we're pretty certain that Gen Z is probably going to be at least as interested, if not more interested. So what do we know about the history of this basic 40-hour, 9 to 5, or 8 to 4 or 7 to 3 kind of work schedule? What do we know about this? Where does it come from? Has it always been around? And is there the possibility that we might actually do more with less? Maybe, but we'll have to examine the history of that and talk about the potential consequences of providing freedom at work. Who loses when we provide more freedom at work? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. The 40-hour work week was not ordained from above. It's a human invention that grew out of the Industrial Revolution. Anthropologists find that for more than 95% of human history, people enjoyed more leisure time than we do right now. Generations of hunter-gatherers subsisted on 15-hour work weeks. When we started treating humans like machines, we began confusing time spent with value created. I really want people to hold on to that little bit.
That's huge, isn't it?
That I just said right there. Because I think that's key. So there was this manufacturing company, and leaders noticed that when retirement finally gives people the freedom to pursue their passions for travel, sports, arts, and volunteering, their health often stands in the way of making use of those things, right? This is not some novel revelation here. This is something that many of us know, is you work really hard through the youth of your life and then you retire and, I'm going to do all these things, but your health might be a problem. So this company started a Retire a Little program, which invited workers to trade 10% of their salaries for Wednesdays off. They expected it to be popular with employees in their 50s, but it was actually employees that were in their 20s who jumped at the opportunity to trade money for time. When people have the flexibility to work less, they often focus better and produce more. Here's big, right? In the US alone, researchers estimate that companies waste $100 billion a year paying for idle time. And that's right. That was billion with a B. $100 billion a year paying for idle time.
It's hard to disprove the numbers.
Was I being loquacious there?
A little bit.
I had a good bit to say.
But you did. But it makes...
My locatiousness? Is that a correct form of loquacious?
That is.
Okay.
But you made the point to me when we started doing this show 7 or 8 years ago. We got into volunteering and money and you said, yeah, but young people will volunteer their time more, or more likely to volunteer their time. Yes, they don't have money, but they're putting a lot of time into the things they believe in. And we've seen that doing this show and you making me aware of that. And as I read and watch, that is so true that young people, though they may not be making a lot of money in their careers because they're just getting started, they're very much into these social programs and social movements that are taking place and giving of their time. So while that may open some eyes in people from my generation, that's something that you told me 7 or 8 years ago that I have watched actually take place. Then being that person who just left their 50s, but is, quote, retired, with 3.5 part-time jobs.
You're like over the second hill now, right?
Yes. Well,
because 40 is the first.
My daughter said something to me last night about, Dad, you're not retired. You have how many part-time jobs? And we started naming them. And she goes, so we'll give you 3.5 part-time jobs. So, but there is that thing about, as you get older, it starts to be a little bit harder. So that's kind of an interesting program. But that whole concept, I just wowed with hunters and gatherers subsisted on 15-hour work weeks. Just amazing, right? And here we are, and I'm one of those nose to the grindstone people, put in 50, 60, 70-hour weeks, and that's going to make me successful and yada, yada, yada. And
and it did, right? I mean, in fairness.
Yeah, and I think most people would look at my life and say it was successful, but from a monetary fashion. But I was lucky enough too that I think my life was successful because I affected the lives of young people in a very positive way. At least they tell me I have. That.
But by multiple measures, the sale and the pitch of if you put in the time, you can succeed worked.
It worked for me.
And we talked about one of the resistance factors to some of this might be, there's a lot of people your age, right, that are still leading organizations or teams or managing or
true, and
or
even
doing
2 decades older than me,
right,
who are still out there pushing 40, 50, 60-hour work weeks.
And I think one of the resistance factors to this might be, because it is hard, right? If you've invested what you feel like was what you were told you had to do, which was the hard work, right? And now we're coming along and saying, well, really, if we could get the same stuff done and put in half the time, or if we could get 80% done and put in half the time and thereby give people more flexibility, or even put in the same amount of time, but we're going to unshackle you from any restraint on when you do it, all of those things can meet resistance simply for the fact that, well, that's not how I had to do it. And it doesn't seem fair that somebody else, is going to basically be able to achieve the same thing with all these additional perks.
Well, that was the big push right in the medical field about a decade ago when they said the intern program was going to change from having to work 80 straight hours or something, some ungodly 100 hours a week or whatever. And they said, that's not good. They're young. Yes, but they're going to make mistakes learning that. And they changed the whole process. And all the old doctors said, wait a minute, that's what I had to do to become a physician. So why didn't everybody else have to do that? Well, because we learned it. Maybe we have a better way to do it now. So, but you're right. That's where the pushback comes from. And it's like the same example, the government in Iceland. You say, well, it's Iceland. But no, they still have things they have to get done. But so don't poo-poo it here, but they dropped it. They dropped the work week for 10% from 40 hours a week to 36 hours a week in offices, hospitals, and police stations over a 4-year period. And they found out that obviously well-being and work-life balance improved because you're working 10% less, but productivity was sustained across the board and in some cases heightened, which goes to your point of in the United States, it's estimated that we lose $100 billion a year for paying for idle time. So the government of Iceland just turned it on its head and said, okay, instead of paying for that lost time, we're just going to say you can go home. And they found out that people got as much work done, if not even more work done in that shorter work period. So, again, you can argue with this, I guess, on an intellectual level, but on a factual level, here it is, folks. People are being just as productive working less, and in some cases being even more productive. And so maybe it's something that we need to think about. Maybe you get more out of your workers. But I also agree with you, Justin. I think there are some jobs, and we've talked about this, where that doesn't work. That you just, if I walk into the emergency room, you can't look at me and say, oh, we don't man it from this, for these 4 hours because Yeah, we reached our productivity level.
Because nobody wants to be here from midnight to 4 a.m.
Right. And,
so it's too bad. It's too bad that you're dying, but we can't do, we're not going to do anything.
Or,
about
we'll cover from midnight to 4 a.m. because we know we see a lot of patients. We've done the studies, but there's nobody here from 8 to 12 in the morning because we don't see that much activity. So we just shut down. Well, obviously, folks, we can't do that, right? We have to it's an emergency room. It needs to be staffed, whether there are people coming in or out of it. But it does make it interesting for other jobs. And that age-old question, do you pay me for sitting here? And I try to create some work to look busy, and then I get rewarded for it because, hey, Jackson's always here. Man, he's here when boss comes in. There's Jackson sitting at his desk. When the boss goes home, there's Jackson sitting at his desk. Oh, it's time to promote somebody. We're going to promote Jackson because he spends a lot of time here. He must get a lot done. And maybe I do, but maybe I don't. And, a Weller over there, geez, he comes in at 10 and leaves at 4, geez, he playing golf? What's he doing? He's not working very hard. Yet if you look at the productivity reports, old Weller's getting twice as much done as Jackson, but we reward Jackson and not Weller?
Well, that's because Jackson's spending too much time being loquacious. So he's here all the time, but he's just talking away.
He's standing at the water cooler being loquacious with everybody.
But that is right. One of the challenges here, and to that point specifically, this is one of those human failings, right? Of you've got most of the obstacles to this are not data-based, right? Most of the obstacles to this are human resistance based. But that's a legitimate concern, right? Because if you're working from home all the time, somebody else is showing up at the office, we have the data that says they're more likely to get the promotion, regardless of if they're actually more productive than you.
They who? You lost me there.
The person in the office.
Oh, so the data shows
the person in the office is more likely to get the promotion than the person working at home.
Man, so now I want to have that negative and positive freedom, but if I do, I may not, quote, be as successful monetarily.
Well, and that's where an adjustment has to be made, right? And this should probably be made anyway. We often, and you're going to say, well, wait a minute, doesn't it make sense to promote the people that work hard? Yes and no.
Right?
Yes, if you think that they're actually well qualified to be a good leader. Remember, you could give somebody a pay raise and let them keep doing the same job, right? You're doing a really good job. So how do I reward you? Well, I give you a new job. Well, maybe they don't really maybe they're happy with the job they're doing, right? Maybe that's why they do a good job at it. So I think there's also that rethinking of, well, it's not always that somebody needs a better position. Sometimes they just want to be recognized for what they're doing. And just because they do a good job at this doesn't mean that they do a good job at whatever this other thing is that you're going to make them do, Likewise, you might be really good at cranking out, whatever it is that you're doing, but you may not be very good at getting 5 or 10 other people to crank out stuff.
Right. You may be able to make more widgets than anybody else in the company. And it's proven every day you make 20% more widgets. We make you the boss and you upset everybody because you're going around complaining, man, you guys are slow. You people don't get the work done. You're not very good at leadership skills. You're a great widget maker, but you don't have the leadership skills. And so I think we do make a mistake that way. We reward the hardest workers in leadership. And because when you don't, what happens? If I'm the hardest worker and a promotion comes up and for leadership position and I don't get it, then I'm got sour grapes. Well, I put all my time in. I do all this. I'm the best producer. Why don't I lead? Well, because it's a different skill set.
It reminds me of when I was playing AAU basketball, which for those of you that don't know, is basically travel basketball outside of your school team. And we were really excited because we got word that our new coach was going to be a retired professional basketball player. And everybody thought, oh my gosh, we're going to be the greatest team out there. And he was an awful coach. He was terrible. He could play great. When he would show us something, awesome. But when he would try anything other than that, terrible.
Right.
So bad that he would, in the middle of a game, he would just stop coaching. He wouldn't substitute people in. He wouldn't call plays. He abandoned the team out on the court, Great player, terrible coach, And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here, right?
Mm-hmm.
You may be an awesome worker. That doesn't mean that you're the right person to be promoted to lead the team. So just in that Jackson Weller story that Lance pitched, Weller might be the right one to lead the team because he's not very good at cranking out the stuff that needs to be done, but he might be really good at keeping everybody organized, on task, and leading the way,
Exactly. And you need both
exactly
to run your company well, just like you need negative and positive freedoms to have that balance in life to get the most out of it.
But so much of this requires that rethinking of, and the key, right, is this is not the way that it's been done for most of human history. This is the way it's been done for everybody that's alive today on planet Earth. It's what we're all used to. And therefore wait a minute.
You mean there's more history than just the time I've been alive? I mean, stuff has gone on before me and will go on after me? Wow,
yeah.
What a new concept. You just blew my mind there, Justin. Sorry, folks, a little facetious there.
Big brain ideas here. But yeah, I mean, that's the thinking, right? Well, but it's a known factor. I mean, humans have done that. The psychological studies tell us that we base things. I mean, it's how we're wired, right? We base things off of our experience and the experience of the people we know. And if nobody that we know has ever lived under a culture where that's not the way it was, we just assume that it's never been that way. It's a natural assumption, and we do that with everything, right?
Unfortunately,
but we have to
practice
some permeance here, right? And keep in mind that just because we haven't seen it or just because we haven't experienced doesn't mean it doesn't exist and doesn't mean that it isn't good, right?
Doesn't mean it won't work.
For 99% probably of human existence on this planet, the 40-hour work week didn't exist. It's a modern invention. Which, in fairness, has made us the greatest economy in the world and the world power. So it's like, it's not to say that there wasn't value to it, but what we're seeing is new generations of Americans are saying, we're not sure that this is how we want things to stay. Are we paying you for your time or for your work? And what are the dangers of, great, we're going to pay you for the work? Who suffers? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Lance, I got these 10 lawns that need mowed, and they're worth $30 a piece to me. I don't care how fast or how slow you get them done. It pays $30 either way. I just need them all mowed by Sunday. What's the issue with that? I mean, there's no issue for you, right? That sounds good. But what if I don't have that job and I'm working in a factory? How does you having that job cause a problem for me?
Well, you're like, he's not working as many hours as I am, and he's making more money. When we were talking about this and in planning the show, that was my biggest thing is I've had people look at me and say, well, you're a school teacher. You get those months off in the summer. And my comeback was always, well, when you graduated high school, did you have the opportunity to become a school teacher? Well, but that's not the point. I'm like, well, no, that is the point, is that we had an opportunity at some point in our lives to decide what we're going to do. Now, you didn't totally agree with me, and you had some good points there. But that's kind of been my take, is that, well, we do live in the United States of America. And if I wanted to become a welder, I could have become a welder. But I also did this. I'm paid for my work. My first real paying job was delivering newspapers, which I know now you say, well, how do you do that when I download it off the internet? How did you deliver it? Well, no, back in the old days, folks, for all you young people, you actually got a physical paper delivered to your home. And it was up to us carriers to bring that from the production stage to your front door. And again, I got paid per customer. If it took me 30 minutes to deliver my papers, then I made that much more money. If I messed around and it took me an hour and a half because I was, riding my bike up and down the street and going over here to get an ice cream cone, I still made the same amount of money. So I've kind of worked jobs where I was paid by the hour and where I was paid for, no, this is the job. As quickly as you get it done, that's what you get. So I see both ways.
There's a finite amount, right, of time. I mean, it is something that we, at least right now, can't manufacture any more of, right? Lance gets the same number of hours. He gets 24 hours every day, just like I get 24 hours every day, right? In some ways, time is the great equalizer, right?
That is true.
But it can also be the great divider. And that's part of what Lance is sharing here, because Yes, and this is a hard thing, right? Because we're trying to be open-minded because that's one of the things we're supposed to do here. It's difficult for Lance and I think, to envision truly being in a position where we didn't feel like we had much choice over what we were going to do. I mean, it's always kind of been, I think, in different ways, but for each of us, if I don't like what I'm doing, I'm just going to go do something else, Oh, well, I'll just go do something else.
I've got options.
I mean, I thought I was going to be a psychiatrist, and then I was going to school and looking at what it was going to take. And I was like, yeah, I'm not willing to do what it takes. I don't want it that bad. I have these other things that I'd rather do, and I don't need 12 years of school to do them, so
Right.
I'm not going to do them. And for Lance, he tried a couple different jobs, and it's like, yeah, I'm not really sure that I want to do this my whole life. I think I want to be a teacher. Well, they told me I have to go to school to be a teacher. So that's what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? I think my point is that, and I'm sure a lot of you listening, that's very much how life has been, right? It's just kind of like, yeah, I'll just find something else, right? I'll just go do something else if I don't like what I'm doing. The thing that's really hard to fully think about here and put into the right perspective is, what about for the people that are growing up, right, in a household where their parents and their parents' parents, they never lived a life where they worked really very hard, and they never lived a life where they did anything other than kind of roll out of high school right onto the factory floor, I'm not saying that it's not possible to, if you want to get out of that. I mean, if you want to do that, great, right? I mean, obviously we've talked about, we got to have people doing that because, I mean, we need products made, we need products moved, we need them shipped. They're important jobs, but
there's value to that, because when I worked in the factory, my weekends were mine. When I was a school teacher, my weekend belonged to my students because I was preparing, I was grading, I was doing all, it was a 7-day-a-week job. Working in a factory where you punch the time clock at 7 and leave at 3, there's some real value to that, because other than 7 to 3, your time is yours. So I would never put that down and say one is better than the other. It's what do you gain from it? What do you want?
It's this idea of, depending on the job you're doing, right, and what's required of the job. And a school teacher is not a bad example. It could be very difficult to have enough money to say, well, I'm just going to leave this job and then go figure out what I want. What probably needs to happen is you have to figure out what you want to go get while you're still working. And if you're in a job that pays you for your time, for you to be present, right, versus paying you for your output, what happens is, and this is what I had posed to Lance, the fear would be that the people who have the greater liberty, right, the negative and positive liberty combined, which is how we get our net freedom, right, the ones with the higher net freedom, they're going to have the flexibility to restructure their time to allow them to make, or to get more educated, or to make more money, or both. And what happens is, the fear would be that the class separation gets even bigger. If the class divide happens, but everybody's gone into it eyes wide open, I got no problem with it, right? Because I mean, again, I'm all about that. I agree, it's personal choice. If the thing for
if
you,
I'm happy in a tiny home, why do I have to
Exactly.
have a 3,000 square foot house?
But it's that whole, you don't ask people to know what they don't know, right? We talk about that a lot. And so, yes, I'm on that page of, I think that's the main solution to this, is we have to start talking to people about, there are options out there, right? And especially now more than there's ever been. I was just reading about, John Deere workers going on strike for more flexibility in their pay and their time at work, and the workers have the advantage right now, right? Because the labor market's tight. So now is the time to be discussing with folks. You have more options probably than you did 15 years ago in regards to this kind of stuff. And technology, right, has greatly changed that dynamic as well. I mean, in fairness to the 40-hour work week, some of what we do now is simply just wouldn't have been practical 40 years ago, because you just couldn't, you had to physically show up, to see the people, to have the conversation, to get the thing done, and you had to hand somebody the piece of paper, right? You had to turn in the report. Well, now I just email the report, right? And Lance can be on his beach in Hawaii, and I can be sitting here freezing my butt off in Ohio, and we still get everything done that we needed to get done. To your point, there is a value to clock in, clock out, and I'm done. Work is at work and it's over. And some of those, I mean, some of the white collar jobs, right, are not that way. It's really hard because since you have your own structure, and that's what we saw during the pandemic, those people worked more, not less, you know, because it's like, well, I don't have this structure that I'm used to. So here's all these things I know I need to do. Well, I'm going to do this now. And all of a sudden at the end of the day, you spent 12 hours working, not 8, you know?
And in this report, there are companies that had like dark out periods. They said no email, no company email after 7 o'clock in the evening, and nothing on Saturday and Sunday. I know with shift work, when I was doing that, there was always a premium paid if you worked second or third shift, because it was harder to fill those jobs because everybody wanted to work 7 to 3 or 8 to 4 or 9 to 5. But if you would work the second shift or third shift, they'd pay you more money to get you, to incentivize working that. So I guess what I'm saying is there's the foundation is there to make some of these changes, that it's not that big shift in thinking. It's not the big paradigm shift that some people think it is. We've got things in place that we've always done that would make the changes, I think, a little smoother if people stopped and thought about them, to where we can have the best of both worlds more than we do now.
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to do here at the State of Us, is have these honest, open, and respectful conversations. And that's our mission here at True Chat. And if you like today's show, you should probably tell some other people about it and let them know that there's a lot of different ways they can listen. They could go to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Overcast, or anywhere that podcasts are found. And when can people get new episodes of the State of Us, Lance?
Well, you can get new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 4 a.m. or whenever you decide to get up. But that's when they're posted out there on the World Wide Web. It's
Eastern time, right?
Eastern time zone here in the United States. And, we're also a syndicated radio show that can be found on the weekends. And you need to check your dial. And if your favorite radio station on the weekends does not carry the State of Us, you need to call them and say, hey, this thing's a great podcast, and I think it would make money for your radio station. People would want to listen, and you could sell lots of advertising and make money. So get us on your local radio station as well.
Well, Lance is very loquacious, and so he succeeded, I think, again, in the word of the day, the loquacious word of the day competition, which puts us at, I believe, 5-5. So I think it's a tie today again, man.
Well, maybe by the time Bradley gets done cutting stuff,
Lance has the count.
I will only have 5, but I had me winning like 12-3. So,
oh, well,
But whatever Justin says goes, because he's the host, except we flipped things in there at the end. So hopefully you stayed out.
That was good. You stayed
listened.
with it.
Yeah,
so.
I could follow.
Can you take us out?
I'll try.
It's only been 10 years. This November is only 10 years, Lance. This tells you, right? He doesn't listen to the end of the show. He just tunes out. Oh, it's my turn.
I know I have to say. And I'm Lance Jackson. Thank you to Bradley Butch for his work on the show. And there's this other guy over here. Who are you?
Justin Weller.
Okay. So, for Justin and Lance here at True Chat, we appreciate you listening, and we'll catch you on the flip side. We're out.
Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.